Do you remember when you first heard the phrase, Black Lives Matter? I think it's been in our lives now since about, thank you, since about 2012. And I think it's just part of it. It's something that we say. It's something, we have a sign out front that says Black Lives Matter. But what is that? What does it really mean? In 2016, one of the co-founders, Patrice Khan-Cullors, said this: Black Lives Matter is our call to action. It is a tool for reimagining a world where Black people are free to exist, free to live. It is a tool for our allies to show up differently for us. Black Lives Matter offers a new vision for young Black girls around the world that we deserve to be fought for, that we deserve local governments to show up for us. I like that. So Black Lives Matter began in 2012. Well, it began in 2013, but in 2012, you'll remember that Trayvon Martin, the 17-year-old Black man, was killed by George Zimmerman. Martin was visiting family in Sanford, Florida, and he was walking back home from a convenience store. You probably remember the story. Zimmerman thought he looked suspicious, called the police. The police said, don't do anything more, we'll be there. But Zimmerman followed him, confronted him, and shot and killed him. And when law enforcement arrived, Zimmerman claimed that he had been assaulted by Martin and fired in self-defense. The case highlighted the use of racial profiling and the justification of killing Black men. You may remember that Barack Obama, who was in his first term as president at the time, reacted to this reality with the haunting statement, "If I had a son, he'd look like Trayvon." So when Zimmerman was acquitted of manslaughter in 2013, under Florida's Stand Your Ground law, there was a huge uproar about the injustice. In response, a woman named Alicia Garza posted this message on Facebook: Black people, I love you. I love us. Our lives matter. Black lives matter. The message resonated with her friends, Patrice Khan-Cullors and Opal Tometi. The three women made Black Lives Matter into a hashtag, which flagged it on social media. And soon, they had built a community online to encourage people to take action offline. They later said they created a container for Black protests to be seen and taken seriously. And just like dandelions, they said, protests bloomed out of that. And this container was needed as the killing of Black people, especially by law enforcement, continued. It created protests or it gave rise to protests for the murders of Mike Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, Eric Garner in New York, Rekia Boyd and Laquan McDonald, both in Chicago in 2014, around then. And it continued through the years, most memorably perhaps after the killing of George Floyd in 2020. Each protest expressed outrage at the continuing violence against Black people and the many ways the justice system targets Black bodies. It brought into focus the white supremacy that pervades every system in this country. That every system that devalues and disadvantages Black people, and really all people of color as well, to varying degrees. White supremacy, and these are Robin DiAngelo's words, is a political, economic, social system of domination. This system is based on the historical and current accumulation of structural power that privileges, centralizes, and elevates white people as a group. She says she uses the term to capture the pervasiveness, magnitude, and normalcy of white dominance and assumed superiority in this country, in this culture. And that kind of assumed superiority was at play in the medical system that harvested and used Henrietta Lacks's cancer cells, as well as who gets to tell her story. When cells from her particularly aggressive cancer were cultured at Johns Hopkins in 1951, they demonstrated an exceptional ability to reproduce without end. That's just, most cells don't do that. They have a normal life cycle and they die. And so if you're trying to grow a culture of human cells, they will die. But this particularly virulent cancer kept going. And it became incredibly useful then for all kinds of studies. And they led to things like the polio vaccine, HIV breakthroughs, and understanding how the human body might react to space travel. All kinds of things. There are tons of patents based on studies that were performed on these cells. And so the story of the scientific discoveries is truly remarkable, especially to science nerds like me. Very fascinating. But while so much good has come from the use of those cells, the impact on her family highlights the systemic racism in the medical system and lots of other ways as well. And now in the 40s and 50s, the Lacks family was living in Baltimore, and medical care there was, for Black people, was generally provided at Johns Hopkins in a segregated ward that was set up for this purpose. But many in the Black community were very wary of the predominantly white medical system, and for a lot of good reason. They had a lot to fear by the system in general that took advantage of Black bodies. And so they often saw that the hospital is a place of death and not care. How much information Henrietta Lacks received about her condition is not really clear, but it looks like there were some areas at least where she was not informed, according to her records. Like, she didn't know that the radiation treatment that she underwent would leave her infertile. And she later, when she found out, apparently she said that she wouldn't have undergone the treatment in that case. Now, it's not surprising that Henrietta Lacks was not told that her cells would be used for research. This is kind of commonplace for all of us. If you've ever had a thing removed, those cells might be stored and used for some other purpose, for study or for something. And especially in those days, there was nothing like consent. And today there's usually somewhere in the fine print before you go into a surgery, there's something about, consenting to use whatever tissue might be removed for some purpose. And you usually just sign it without really reading it. I don't know if that's true for you, but I think that's pretty common. But what does surprise me is that years later, when researchers needed to develop genetic markers for her cells, the HeLa cell line, they asked her descendants to donate blood for their research, but didn't inform them as to why. They had no idea. And when the family tried to request information from Hopkins, once they realized that these were her cells, that the whole HeLa cell line was from her, and they didn't find out for another 20 plus years, they went to Johns Hopkins for information and they couldn't get any. They weren't given information. What's worse to me about the story is that the author of that book, The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, whose book really popularized Lacks's story, was able to get so much information about Lacks from Johns Hopkins. She was able to go in there and ask for information. And she did share a lot of it with the family. But it's curious that the family couldn't get that information. And what's worse is that, how many of you have read this book? Have any of you read it? It's quite interesting. Her scientific writing is fascinating. Her writing about the family is detailed and also from a very particular point of view. And the family ended up objecting to so many of the details that were in there. That the family was poor, that Henrietta Lacks was illiterate. These were lies. It's not really the case. And it came from a particular perspective. And as I read the book, I was reminded of a poem by Nikki Giovanni called Nikki Rosa, in which she writes that about her hope that no white person ever has cause to write about me. Because, she says, they'll probably talk about my hard childhood and never understand that all the while I was quite happy. Misinformation in the book and the question of compensation for the Lacks family from the book sales and the medical innovations divided this once tight-knit and happy family. This is a story that one of the second book, the one that was written by Ron Lacks, describes these conflicts in some detail. And it is a truly sad outcome of a remarkable story. And I wish the family well and healing and unification, and hopefully whatever that lawsuit, however that turned out, it was settled out of court and it's no details. I hope that that benefits all. So the Black Lives Matter movement arose during the first Obama administration. And you remember now, when he was first elected, there was hope that the country was now moving into a post-racial phase. Remember that? And perhaps his election made greater the contrast with the attitudes towards Black people kind of in general in this country. I think kind of exacerbated things. And so Black Lives Matter's attention to the various murders of Black men highlighted the deeply embedded white supremacy in the justice system and the government. Their mission statement is, Black Lives Matter imagines a world where Black people across the diaspora thrive, experience joy, and are not defined by their struggles. In pursuing liberation, we envision a future fully divested from police, prisons, and all punishment paradigms, and which invests in justice, joy, and culture. And that is quite a vision. That is a beautiful vision. Now, a lot of folks took umbrage at the cry to divest from the police. Do you remember those controversies? I know that I was there in Portland at General Assembly in 2015 when there was an action of immediate witness that was debated, and it was hotly debated, and ultimately was approved to support the Black Lives Matter movement. So a lot of people, though, were thinking that the movement was anti-police and anti-rule of law. Yet the movement sought to expose an underlying truth, that the justice system as we know it largely rose from the Jim Crow laws that were developed to keep Black people in post-slavery America under control, right? Clamped down. Racism was deeply embedded, and is still there. And though vigilantism and brutality are no longer officially condoned, racial profiling and rough justice and bias against black people were still deeply embedded in that system, in this system that we live with. And I think there have been a lot of changes and inroads, and that's great, but it's still there. And most white people bought the story that extra policing of black people was necessary, right? Because of the nature of black people. Last week, the comedian Leslie Jones talked about racism on The Daily Show. Did anybody see that? It was powerful. She got real. She pointed out that racism keeps spreading because we Americans keep being fed false information about black people. It continues to be amplified in the media and the government, and the prejudice that gets passed on from one generation to the next. Jones says that it's so easy to fall for it, but we must resist. She called out the nonsense going on today as the Trump administration is censoring information about slavery, racism, and the accomplishments of black people, among others, from museums and national parks and monuments. She says that if a museum doesn't send you out weeping and wanting to give your closest black friends reparations, it's not doing it right. It's not doing it right. She says teaching slavery is not woke, it's history. It's history. And the truth doesn't foment racism. We need to pay attention to the propaganda and check our own assumptions about black and all non-white people that we encounter. And we need to think carefully before calling the police on a black person, right? We all know this, right? Because their safety and lives may depend on it. I recently heard Nicole Hannah-Jones, the creator of the 1619 Project, at the New York Times about the impact of, and that really this country and all of its laws and systems are based on the beginning of slavery. The point of the project, yes, was to do that, to point out how much our society today is based on the country's history of slavery, though most of us don't know it. She said the project got a lot of blowback, as if knowing our history is dangerous could destroy the country. In 2020, following George Floyd's killing, many companies came out with pledges of anti-racism and started diversity and equity and inclusion trainings that were, she points out in this interview, largely performative, right? That is, they were primarily to signal that they were safe and didn't need more scrutiny about racism, and it was kind of superficial, right? But it was something. And at that time, it became clear that actually a majority of people in America supported Black Lives Matter and what it stood for. And yet it's also true that a lot of white people felt threatened by black people finding an opening to raise their voices and exert some power during all these times, during the protests. So Hannah-Jones noted that the normative state of America, this is sad, but probably true, is regressive, not progressive, despite the myth of exceptionalism that we cling to in this country. So from her point of view, we tend to want to go back. We tend to want to keep things the way they always were, right? And that's a larger we about kind of the general culture, right? It's like, well, we can move that way or this, but we want to kind of come back to right here where it's, I don't know, safe. So it was clear that a backlash was coming. And now, of course, with Trump's reelection, the government is exerting tremendous state power to shut down anything that doesn't venerate America, that is, doesn't tell a story that shows our exceptionalism, that shows white people as heroes, that shows progress, constant progress. And unfortunately, many individuals and corporations that espoused anti-racism in 2020 have been capitulating, right? They've been taking down the DEI. They've been kind of dismantling the programs. And although there are no laws against DEI, these groups are complying in advance. And we need to be careful that we're not complying in advance too, and that the groups that we're associated with are not complying in advance. Now, fortunately, here in California, there is a movement toward reparations. Last year, NBUU heard a lot about the state's reparations report, which was amazing. And as we speak, 4 bills about reparations are on the governor's desk to be signed into law, and he has until October 12th to do it. The bills are about establishing a bureau for descendants of American slavery that will confirm the lineage status and ensure the implementation of reparative policies with precision and equity, establishing a process for conducting or verifying genealogical research for the purpose of confirming an individual's status as a descendant of an enslaved person, for eligibility for reparations, addressing harm caused by the discriminatory use of eminent domain. There's a lot of that going on in this state. And 4th is reserving a portion of California's first-time homebuyer program funds for descendants of formerly enslaved people. Those are the 4 that made it through the legislature this year and are on his desk. As the Alliance for Reparations, Reconciliation, and Truth, do I have that right? Yes, writes, reparations are not just about addressing historical slavery. They are also focused on the ongoing harms and unfair practices that Black people continue to experience today in education, healthcare, housing, and employment. By implementing reparations, California is righting its wrongs and laying the groundwork for a brighter future and healing for everyone. The governor, as I said, has until October 12th to sign the bills. And I encourage you, if you can, reach out and tell him how you feel about it. Encourage him to sign those laws. So how else? How else? What else can we do to demonstrate our commitment to Black Lives Matter? So many things. The first I'm just going to offer you is to keep speaking up. It's important to talk with the silent majority who may be thinking that DEI went too far, but don't see the real goals of the Trump administration to get rid of civil rights across the board. I mean, this goes so much farther than a DEI program. And keep listening to Black people and honor their voices. Listen to them and follow their lead. It's not enough to stay quiet or to wish that others will stay quiet and perpetuate the myth of how great America is. We have to work at it. We have to work for it. And we need to keep examining the assumption that white bodies and experiences are the norm. For example, you hear these phrases all the time, a Black actress, an Asian professor, right? When we wouldn't say a white actress or a white professor, right? We assume that the white is the norm. It needs to stop. We need to look at that in all the ways that we normalize, that those of us who are white normalize the white experience and our own personal experience. And we need to think about what the Lax family and Ron Lax is saying, that middle-class America doesn't look one way. There's a huge range of our families and our structures and our sense of wealth and our sense of happiness, our source of happiness. We can't base things on what we always just see in the media and accept that. I'd love to hear what you are all doing to support Black lives and to do your own inner work around this, because we all carry assumptions. I certainly carry assumptions, and I keep trying to shed them. But I'm grateful that we can do this together. I'm grateful that we've got each other, because together we can move from where we are to a truly multicultural, multiracial America that works for all of us. It's going to take time, but I'm going to hold that vision, and I hope you'll hold it with me. May it be so. Amen.